Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to SEVA VentRounds. Today is November 12th, 2024, and we're going to talk about working against the ventilator and reading some waveforms. Disclosures: there's no endorsements of any mode, ventilator, or manufacturer. Whatever we say, it's our opinion. It does not represent the Cleveland Clinic. I'm Eduardo Mireles. Those are my conflicts of interest. Rob Chatburn is also on the call, and those are his. Remember to keep your microphone muted, just for the sake of recording. And if you want to comment, either put it on the chat function or speak up. Have no fear, but just keep your microphone muted in between. There is, for respiratory therapy, CRCEs, and for staff, there is the staff of the Cleveland Clinic, there are CMEs. All right, so let's start with just some basic concepts, which is, let's talk a little bit about work shifting and assistance. And I will basically highlight that there is a lot of work being done here. This is an area that it's evolving, but we'll present it as we understand it, which will help you understand what we're seeing. So this is a common graph that we use. We use this graph to highlight patient and the patient strength or effort, sorry, the PMOS, so the work of breathing from the patient, and on the other side, the work of breathing from the ventilator or P-vent. And we usually just put P-vent and PMOS to make it easier for all of us. But the concept is there's work on one side, work on the other. And then you have on the Y and X axis at the 0, and then higher P-vent if you can move up, and then if you move to the right, higher PMOS. And what this graph is trying to highlight is that as PMOS starts moving to the right, the pressure from the ventilator may have different relationships. It may stay constant, go down, or go up. But there's going to be some degree of work shifting that will start occurring, and this becomes more evident on certain modes. So just for the sake of understanding this, you can imagine, and let's start with at the beginning of the graph, that you may have patients in which there is very little PMOS being occurred, and here highlighted as the shadow in red, and there's a lot of P-vent, and sometimes that's intentional, meaning that we don't want any PMOS to be there because of severe shock or severe lung injury or whatnot. And that if it's intentional, then that's okay. That over assistance may be okay. But here we're talking about that unintentional, where you have set the tidal volume or the pressure too high, and that has shut down the respiratory muscles. And so the patient is generating very little effort. And the danger of that is obviously muscle atrophy. And this I refer to all the muscles in the respiratory system. On the other extreme, you have a patient in which it has very high PMOS, but very little P-vent. So very little support from the ventilator. And that's where the risk of that is likely myotrauma. So the muscle getting injured from not being supported enough and doing very high work of breathing. And there may be actually circumstances in which the patient is working against the ventilator. So it's actually generating effort against this. And you can start imagining that regarding the mode, there's modes that cause this more than others. And that's our classic graph that we have in where the support, the P-vent goes down as the patient does more effort. And that's our volume control CMBS, or the adaptive modes, or adaptive targeting, which is PCCMB A or CSBA, sorry. CSVA. And then in the middle, there's, and this happens very often, is that the presence of PMOS and the presence of PVent, both at the same time. And the ventilator is doing some work of breathing and the patient is doing some work of breathing. And there's a balance between these. Now, how do you measure this is a little bit tricky. We do it by looking at the waveforms, but some groups are looking at the tidal volume. What's the tidal, especially when you're in pressure control, is the tidal volume below or above what the patient needs, how the patient responds to titration of pressure, the use of proportional modes and how they protect you against perhaps under assistance or over assistance, and how does that affect. So it's a work in progress, but this is how we right now refer to it. Rob?
I think this is a beautiful graphic. This is a new graphic. And just to highlight the fact that the yellow arrow indicates that anytime PVent and PMOS are above 0, there's work sharing or work shifting.
Right. And we used to call, you remember, I mean, we call it severe work shifting, where it crossed below the baseline. But I think that I'm inclining more to talk to this. I mean, there is severe work shifting. There's a large amount of work and loaded breaths. But the term of under assistance generates this thought of you're not doing what you should be. You should be supporting this patient a little bit better. So I will leave it at that. And again, as I said, there is some work or a lot of work that is being done on this area. So here's our first one. And I found this in our archives of cases. But I thought that this would be a good example of talking about it, of this interaction. So as usual, we'll start by what's the tag. And so if you want to type it in the chat, have no fear. Nobody can see the chat. Well, everybody can see the chat, but not in the YouTube area. Very good. I see the answers coming in, and rapidly the team recognized one of the key features is that this is not volume control. This is pressure control, and we know that because just by looking at the flow, you can see the multiple versions of flow that exist here, even with a little pause at the end. And we can also see up here the mode, but remember the commercial name doesn't help us, but we know that this is a servo, a PRBC, so we know the tag already, but this is PC. All breaths are mandatory, and this is a good example to break one of the common myths of what is a spontaneous breath, right? Rob discusses a common issue. And you can see that all breaths are being triggered by the patient, but that doesn't mean that this is spontaneous. This just means that the patient is triggering the breath. Then we go and look at what's cycling the breath. And in this case, we know it's time just by looking at what would be the second breath, this one over here. And we see this little pause that immediately tells you that there's time involved here, that it's an inspiratory time. We also know this mode, PRBC, is a CMB targeting scheme, but the clue is right here. And that makes it a mandatory targeting. Rob?
Yeah, this is an interesting example of why we define a breath in terms of the flow waveform and not the pressure waveform, right? So the definition of a breath is, or inspiration versus expiration, is the duration of the start of positive flow to the start of negative flow. And the expiratory time is the start of negative flow to the start of positive flow. If you were to look up from the middle graph, which is flow, to the pressure flow, you might be fooled into thinking it was the other way around.
Yeah. That's a great point. I love that. And Ariel is bringing another important mode that this has fooled some caregivers at the bedside, and actually in some of our VentRounds, that they see the name auto mode up here, but it's not lighted, so it changes color to green. So this is just PRBC. even though this tag is here, and you can activate auto mode by clicking it. That's not the mode right now. And then the final statement is adaptive, and this is adaptive targeting, and this was well recognized by the team. And we spoke a little bit about adaptive targeting before, but just remember that in adaptive targeting, you set a tidal volume, which you can see down here. But that tidal volume is not that you're controlling the tidal volume. You are telling the machine a target for tidal volume. And in this case, it's 500. That's a 5. And immediately, if you come and your eyes come and look at the tidal volume, that it's inhaled and exhaled, you rapidly recognize there that the tidal volume is not 500, that the patient is inhaling and exhaling more than 500. So again, this is a target, and the machine will regulate the pressure up and down, not negatively, but up and down, to achieve the tidal volume that the patient wants. So that's what adaptive targeting means. And it behaves very similarly to volume control in that sense that as the PMOS increases, the P-vent will decrease in order to keep the tidal volume at goal. Roberto?
Yeah, so notice that the peak pressure is 15 and the PEEP is 4. 14, I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So that 15 is that little spike you're seeing there, right?
This one.
Yeah.
Yeah, little tears coming out from my. Yeah. All right. So now when we look at this, remember we can see if the load is elastic or resistive, or it can be hidden by PMOS. So what do you think is going on? Yeah, great job, Raquel. This is definitely a PMOS attack, right? Yeah, everybody. Great, great, great. I mean, the key findings here for PMOS is the absence of the exponential decay. The absence of the exponential decay. And so as a learner in mechanical ventilation, to read the waveforms, you have to remember how in pressure control, because we're controlling pressure, the flow waveform would look if it was passive. And it would look something like what I'm putting here in a dashed line, which, well, I'm going to paint it, whatever. So it should look something like this. And it doesn't look like that. I mean, it should be an exponential decay. So all the area, this sinusoidal form, actually is the way that you breathe. Normally, you breathe in a sinusoidal. You have this sinus. So this patient is essentially taking a breath in and then relaxing and coming down. And so you see that beautiful waveform there. But that's all PMOS. All the thing that I'm shading here is all PMOS. And then during exhalation, the same thing should happen. You should have a peak and then an exponential decay. And so you don't see that. You see all this occurring, which is consistent with PMOS. So all the shaded area that I have put there is PMOS. Roberto?
Yeah, looks good.
Yeah. So now I don't know what the load, if it's elastic or resistive. I cannot give you that statement right here. Now, sometimes you're lucky and you get to see a passive breath, either an exhalation or an inspiration, but that's not the case here. In this series, this patient is very active, and you have heard from the team how the pressure is actually negative during inspiration in relationship during the exhalation. So let's take a look at the PV discordance. So in terms of trigger, is it normal, early, late, false, failed? Waiting. There you go. All right. It's suddenly a barrage of answers. Yeah, this is definitely normal. I mean, I see the flow changing. It doesn't until it crosses, it changes color, so it becomes very evident here. The pressure does go down, which if you were not looking where you should be looking, which is the flow, you may misinterpret as a late trigger or something else, but if you come down here to the flow, you can clearly see how it's crossing nicely the baseline. Let me erase the work. There we go, so that we can see a little bit better. Very good. All right, let's go back and grab a pen. So normal, I definitely agree with that. Roberto, disagreements?
No, that's good.
All right, so now we're in inspiration, and this patient is getting assistance, over assistance, or under assistance. Yeah, I mean, I think that wow, great. So this is actually one of those situations in which the patient is working against the breath, and Rob, you used the term loaded breath.
Right.
And if you think about this, the patient is set at a PEEP of 14. The peak pressure, it says that it's 15, which maybe or not this little tip, because I don't know where it's measuring, but let's assume that this is 30 and this is 15. And so if I draw a line there, just for the sake of my eyesight, I would put, thinking that this was 15, the pressure during inspiration goes below, right? The baseline. Rob, can you talk about that concept of loaded breath?
Yes. During inspiration, if airway pressure goes above end expiratory pressure or baseline pressure, then that means you have positive work, which means the ventilator is doing work on the patient. It's transferring energy from the ventilator to the patient. On the other hand, if pressure goes below baseline during inspiration, that's negative work, which is interpreted as the patient is doing work on the ventilator. They're actually trying to suck the gas out of the ventilator faster than the ventilator wants to give it.
Yeah, exactly. So the patient is working against this darn machine right now to a certain degree. And then if you look, well, we're gonna go to the next one. And then in terms of cycle, what do you think is going on here? Normal, early, or late? Yeah, so there's one that's late. This one over here, the second one is late. But I'm gonna call that the second breath. But the rest of them actually look pretty decent, I would say. Even perhaps a little bit, but this could be just messed up by the expiratory work. But I think it's pretty close to it. And sometimes these little ones, you're gonna see a couple whenever you're having mandatory breaths. I mean, we're gonna talk about the mode in a second, but that's another issue. And then finally, expiration. What do you think here? Normal or expiratory work? Yeah, it's working like there was no tomorrow. And so this is another area that's been somewhat neglected in terms of work, which is you can see how the patient is actually exhaling and raising the pressure on the circuit above what it would be 15 for us. I mean, I may be wrong, but that looks like 15, and so that may be it. But that we do see that, and this may be an example of it, in which the patient is actively exhaling against the ventilator and the PEEP, and the pressure goes above that. Rob, thoughts there?
Nope, it covers it.
All right. So yeah, so this is not ATC though. So in overall terms, what you're seeing here is a patient that is breathing at a PEEP of 14, and I want you just for a second to see the settings on the ventilator. And when you see this and you see a FiO2 of 100, a PEEP of 14, a tidal volume of 500, of which, and I'm going to assume this is a 6'2", 6 feet 2 inches individual, and that this was 6 cc per kg, but you can see that the tidal volume is not there, and the patient may be easily getting much more than we intend to. And so if the goal, and you've heard us about this, that all depends on the goal. But if your goal is safety, this is not being met right now. And if the goal is comfort, then I would argue that that's not the case with 100% and 14 of PEEP. But let's say that the goal was comfort. We are not meeting those goals right now. So this is one of those ventilator screens that you have to stop, deal with it, change the patient to pressure support while you figure it out, and then decide sedation, paralysis, so take away the pain. I mean, there's thought process here that you need to come to help this. Yeah, not meeting any goals. Absolutely, Raquel. All right, Rob, any closing comments on this one?
Yeah, this patient's worse off than if he wasn't even connected to a ventilator. He's just on CPAP, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Very challenging. That I put another one just for the sake of our completion of working against the bend. And in this case, this is let's start with the tag. We'll do this one a little bit faster than the other one, but it has a lot of very useful information. So what's the tag for this mode? Yeah, good job, great job, team. So this is definitely PC-CMBS, and the salient feature here is obviously we've talked to death that the pressure by control is not perfect in ventilators. But you would come and look at the flow, and each flow is different. So this is definitely pressure control. And then CMB, you see the pause, and that is telling you that this is an I time. It's a time cycle event, so all of them are mandatory. And in this case, it's set point because we set the amount of pressure. You can see that the pressure was set at 10 above PEEP. So what is the elastic load? What is the load on this patient? And yes, Ariel, good point. Yeah, it's PMOS for everybody, right? And you can't, under these circumstances, at least from the waveforms, deduct what is the compliance. And this is or resistive load. And I will just put a important public announcement is the ventilator is showing here this value, which it says CDIN or dynamic compliance. And sometimes we misinterpret this as, oh, the compliance of the patient is 35. And in the setting of this amount of PMOS, this number is useless. It doesn't provide us, at this point in time, any useful information. Rob, you want to explain why is that?
Well, because compliance as measured by the ventilator can only be calculated based on measured airway pressure and airway flow and volume. So any PMUS is invisible to the ventilator. So as PMUS goes up, then the calculated value for compliance goes up because it thinks that it doesn't need as much pressure to deliver that volume. So anytime you see PMUS, particularly at this level, you can't rely on anything that the ventilator says in terms of calculated mechanics, unless you're using esophageal pressure calculations.
Excellent. In terms of discordance, how's the trigger? Normal, early, late, false, fail? Yeah. Good. Great job, team. So this is definitely normal. I mean, it drops a lot, but it's because this patient is asking for using a lot of effort. So it's the respiratory drive is very high on this patient, but it's normal. In terms of inspiration, is there assistance, over assistance, or under assistance? This is a very tricky, I agree with you. I think that this patient is likely under assisted. However, you can see that the pressure, I mean, it drops during the trigger, it doesn't drop during inspiration. And you could argue that the pressure is above, so there's some level of assistance. Now, there's been some discussion regarding, well, is the under assistance a manifestation of a very low tidal volume? So somebody could be, if you use tidal volume to grade assistance, then you could say that somebody's under assisted if the tidal volume is very low. But in this case, we're talking about PMOS, the amount of work that the patient is doing. It seems that the patient is doing a high amount of work, but it's getting some level of assistance, some level of support. So I don't know if a good measurement right now today that would help us, except doing probably POC and comparing that to where we are and seeing if the patient is doing too much pressure at that time. Other than that, from the waveforms, I would not be, I mean, there is some assistance there happening. Rob, thought process on this?
There's no commercially available display or calculation that can help us, but the way I do it visually, just take that first breath, for example. If that had been a passive breath, you would see an exponential flow curve, right? So if you were to draw that in there with your little dot, now all that part that he just shaded in with red, that represents the volume and the PMUS, or in other words, the work that the patient's doing versus what the ventilator is doing, which is what's left over. So it's damn near 50-50. So the patient's doing about half the work, and you could just arbitrarily say whenever it's over 50%, that's a no good. That's a no bueno.
Yeah.
Just my opinion.
Yeah, that's why I say I love whenever you do that assessment. I really like it, Rob, because it helps me visualize this and kind of make a statement, right? But I think that this is ripe and ready for us to start doing some work and research here on how do you define this and how do you adjust the settings. Then in terms of cycle, what do you think is a cycle?
Yeah, everybody's getting everything right today. That's very impressive.
Very good. So this is definitely late. You see that pause. And actually, there's an observation that Ariel made, but I'm going to highlight it now, which is this patient is set at 14 of PEEP and then 10 of inspiratory pressure. However, you can see that the peak pressure goes all the way to 29. So I usually, what it helps me see is where did the ventilator actually pressurize to, and that helps me visually start seeing where would the patient be pressurized if the patient is not actually exhaling against. So you see how it's not. Sometimes we can have like this one over here. This one, perhaps the patient was a little bit more relaxed and it plateaus. But sometimes you see this peak that it keeps going, and it tells me that the patient, and actually if you see the exhalation, instead of being that nice exponential decay, there is evidence of PMOS there. So I think that this patient is breathing out, trying to exhale during inspiration, and that's why you see the pressure go up and the patient is activating the expiratory muscles, then it releases, and now the patient continues to exhale against this. So the patient is all this period of time, and I'm going to do it on this one, I'm going to draw this line up. All this period of time that we see here, more or less, from here to here, all this is the patient is breathing against the high pressure. And so this is expiratory work that the patient is generating, but it looks like the ventilator is assisting the patient, but this is not the patient assisting. This is the patient breathing against the closed valve that is not opening, because that's the way that the ventilator was designed, that during pressure control, if the patient tried to exhale, it would not let it. Some ventilators do let you exhale. This one doesn't. And then there's evident expiratory work. So this has two examples of an area that needs a little bit, that needs more work regarding how, what first, if is it harmful or not? Maybe this is recruiting this patient more as it's breathing against the or maybe it's hurting, but definitely. So Ariel is asking, how do you fix this? And there are several ways to fix this. Anybody wants to put there? Ariel is already suggested to shorten the eye time. That's one. Any other?
Yeah, Alicia says, what's the
great. I
goal?
love
Yeah.
it, Alicia. Great job. So what's the goal? But yes, PCCSB is a goal, and then there's force pressure support, absolutely. But remember, everything's the goal here. So this patient is from 14 of FiO2, 14 of PEEP. I don't know what's the FiO2. But yeah, the quickest ways you can easily change this patient to pressure support. An experienced respiratory therapist can easily also go down on the eye time. So very good. All right. So what are the key findings for today? This is a Satoshi moment. I know I don't see Satoshi online, but he recommended that we do this. So we talked about a couple of key findings here. We talked about the loaded breath, and I think that that's a important concept. That's a type of severe under assistance. We talked about expiration, active expiration during inspiration, and how that's another type of loaded activity in which the patient is exhaling against a closed valve, and the closed valve is not letting the patient exhale, and it opens and allows the patient to exhale. So in a sense, it's creating a breathing against closed environment. And so this area of over assistance and under assistance is an area under research that we likely are going to see through time evolve and understand a little bit better. But it all starts by knowing how to measure it, and how to first you recognize it, how to measure it, and then from there see what are the outcomes of this. So this is very useful. The other one, and I see Rob put here another item, is that PMOS masks the elastance and resistive load, and so you cannot see them when it's active. Anybody else wants to share any other key findings or take-home messages for us to have? Yeah, good. Yeah, so Ariel talks about looking at the amount of effort and then changing to another type of mode where it's set point depending on your goal and the main problem. Rob talked about, remember, TI and TE, so the inspiratory time and the expiratory time defined by flow waveform, not by pressure waveform. Excellent, excellent points. So TI and TE define in flow waveform. Flow to define the breath. Yeah, thank you, Ariel, for clarifying that. Inspiration and expiratory times. Very good. All right, with that, here's the codes for those staff that want to get CMUs. There's another comment for Raquel. Raquel liked the assessment of PMOS by looking at the in-pressure control breaths to the flow. Rob, also adaptive targeting can lead to more work shifting than set point. So fantastic. All great learning points for today. So thank you all. Have a great day and see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye. Peace.